we're vamping and waiting for everybody to come in, Tony said, gave me permission to say thank you. I'm Walter. Oh, you're here. Okay, I was vamping for you. But there's two things I passionately care about. One is the Middle East, and the other is community colleges, and the ability of community colleges to be the gateway for opportunity to so many people. You know, we've been working, Josh and others at the Institute have been working very hard on that program, and I think it's going to be a focus that we will have over the next few years, is how do you make sure that opportunities exist in a era in which there's closing economic opportunities, not growing. But there's no more important place to do this in the Middle East. I'm glad the ambassador's here, so many others. But in some ways, this is what Aspen is all about, tying together both our ideas in terms of education, but then doing it with Partners for a New Beginning and the other Middle East programs we have at the Aspen Institute. So with that, I want to say thank you. I'm going to sit in the way back and listen, or have it piped out there, but I'll turn it back over to Tony, but I wanted to personally thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you very much, Walter. It's great to have you come by, and I think for me it's wonderful to welcome everyone here, not only on behalf of our Partners for New Beginning, which, as Walter mentioned, is a public-private partnership that brings together what Muhtar Kent has said so often, the golden triangle of public, private sector, and civil society. I'm even more thrilled to have the opportunity that this partnership and our broader Middle East programs is also working closely in collaboration with other programs here at the Aspen Institute. And my colleague Josh Weiner, who is sitting to my right, is an expert on community colleges and best practices. And it has been a great privilege for me to work closely with Josh, and to also have Josh have the opportunity on 2 occasions now to go out to North Africa. And I think that the one, I will let Josh speak for himself, but I do know for a fact he looks forward to not only going out, but spending a little bit more time than he has had the opportunity to do so. The schedule's been tight. My colleague Mesa Mali, who is in the back, who manages the North Africa program and our Levant program, runs a tight ship, and when they are out in the region, they are having so many meetings, both with government and civil society and the education space, that it's hard for anyone to have a chance to really experience the richness of the region. Let me also say, with regard to Josh, Josh has just recently published a book, What Excellent Community Colleges Do, Preparing All Students for Success. For those of you who have not seen this book, I urge you to both buy it and read it. It is a really good learning experience. It's a quick read. It's very well done. And for me, it gave me a lot of takeaways to help inform our thinking on where we go in terms of next steps. So Josh, I hope everyone will avail themselves of this opportunity. I also would like to welcome our panelist, Kelly Keiderling, who is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department in the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. Our colleague Kathy Manis of the American Association of Community Colleges, and Russell Beard of Bellevue College, who came from the other Washington for this panel. Russ, I thank you very much for coming to our Washington on the East Coast, and more importantly, for both you and Kathy for your richness of your and willingness to engage in partnership with us, both of whom were on our delegation in the recent trip and are looking forward to engaging in the conversation. We're also joined by Eamon Guerin of Johns Hopkins SAIS, who has spent the last 10+ years in the region. A special welcome to Ambassador Buhal. Ambassador Buhal is representing the Embassy of Morocco, but he's much more than that to the Aspen Institute. He has been a thought partner for us. He has been a great supporter of our programs, and we are deeply appreciative. Ambassador, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know we have representatives from the other embassies here, from Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and we particularly thank all of you for being here with us. Finally, I'd like to also say that as we embark on the next steps and begin the conversations today, we recognize and fully appreciate that the region is changing, but I think that we have an obligation to partner with this region in many different ways. And we need to bring best practices to the table. And as Josh has reminded me so frequently, and just before we came in here, we here in America are struggling with these issues too, of both youth unemployment, how do you tackle skills gap, and what is the right educational model. I don't know that it is ever right. One needs to remain resilient as we tackle these issues. But for my part, I look forward to very much engaging today on various issues regarding that intersection of the youth workforce and development and the educational space, what I call labor and learning. Many of our colleagues here today, Cosmos Energy has been a real partner with the Aspen Institute and has been very actively involved, as you know, Ambassador Buhal, in Morocco. They've been pushing us, and we have been partnering with them. How do you think outside the box? How do you look down the road of how for example, Morocco is changing the landscape and looking at new opportunities, but how do they help meet this skills gap piece that, and do the training and readjustments in the educational space now? So with that, I would like to welcome everyone. I would like to turn this over to Josh, who will moderate this conversation with us today. And Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you for everybody for coming and for this opportunity. You know, I focus here on higher education programs in the United States and lead the Aspen's programs on community colleges, but some four-year college work as well. And, you know, when you're in a country with 4,000 institutions of higher education, 1,200 of which are community colleges, 20 million students, it's easy to get lost domestically in what's going on. But we are at the beginning of what is really, I think, a longer-term higher education reform movement in this country. We've been engaged for the last 15 or 20 years in K-12 reform. And a lot energy, I can just feel it, is moving towards higher education reform. And why is that? Well, I think some of it is a recognition that we've really changed a lot in this country. 60% of all of our population go to some sort of higher education in their lifetimes, and but only about half of them ever finish a degree. So we've expanded access more than just about any other country, but we have these challenges of degree completion. Similarly, it's not clear that as we've expanded access that we've tied what happens here domestically to the labor markets domestically. So the best estimates are there are a couple of million jobs. Kathy, you may know differently, more recent estimates. A couple million jobs that are going begging because we don't have people with the skills. And yet we do have not unemployment, the likes of which are seen in some North African countries, but we do have more significant unemployment than we've had in the past. And so what's happening? Why aren't our higher education systems graduating students with job-ready skills in the numbers we need? Now, many of them are, to be clear. It's not all bad news, but I think we're starting to see, as governments are looking for greater return on investment, state and federal governments, and as corporations are seeing in a global economy the need for more knowledge, demand for college degrees is increasing. We're seeing domestically more pressure on higher education to produce. And so this opportunity to get out of that context and come to North Africa a couple of times has been really wonderful, both to see more centralized systems of higher education and what the potential is for that, to see some of the parallels being addressed or the challenges. For instance, it's not just the technical skills that we need to develop in people, right? We need people with IT, and we'll hear a little bit more about that, in information technology abilities, welding, healthcare, in manufacturing. There are some things where we need more skills being developed, but we also have this problem of soft skills, of professional skills, of people who are timely to work, who are good team players, who communicate well, verbally and in written language. We have those challenges here. Hearing that those are the same kinds of things that are being confronted in North Africa, I think is both reaffirming. We can learn from one another. It's not just a one-way street. But also, I think importantly, it offers a tremendous opportunity to work together on common challenges, challenges that we may be an hour, not a year, ahead of North Africa in addressing, but still have a long way to go. So the panel here today, we're going to talk a little bit about these issues. What are the issues that we have in common? What are the differences? And what are the challenges of bringing, just one more word about community colleges, is there are 7 million students seeking degrees in American community colleges today. It's nearly half of all of the undergraduates. I say this to people who are among the most educated people in this country, and their eyes like, what do you mean half? Everybody's got a story of somebody who couldn't quite make it in a 4-year college, and they started in a community college, or they got a workforce skill. But the people who know, who are doing the work, understand this is not some sideline of American education. This is half of all undergraduates. This is the workforce human capital strategy on the workforce side is largely in community colleges, and even in general education is there. So this is a movement whose time has come, and we have, with Kathy Manis, really one of the foremost national experts in thinking about the workforce training in community colleges. We have a great exemplar of a community college, Bellevue, that does literally, I mean, not just among community colleges, of all colleges in the country, is one of the best information technology programs in the country. And then the international expertise to understand culturally and in terms of our strategy as a nation, partnering that Kathy can bring, and Eamon can bring in terms of, he just spent 16 years living in...
Right across the region.
Right across the region. So I think we've just got this tremendous amount of expertise here to both on the domestic side and from North Africa that can help us understand this issue and explore what the next steps might be. So with that, let me start with Kathy. Kathy and Russ and I, along with 4 others, and under the great guidance of Maysam, who works with Tony. Maysam, where are you? Maysam Ali, who did a great job of leading us through the region, visited Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and then a Libyan delegation came to Tunisia while we were there. We didn't have time to visit the 4th country on this trip. So Kathy, tell us a little bit about your experiences and what were the challenges in North Africa that you observed during our trip?
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to see so many people interested in this topic in here today, and I just a word to thank the Aspen Institute for the opportunity to have gone on this trip, and certainly to Mason for organizing it. But we had an extraordinary opportunity, not as Josh says, not just to share information that we had, but I think to learn a great deal from the perspective that we saw in Northern Africa. So I tell everyone it was really a life-changing experience for me, and I am really committed now to building on it. Josh says I'm an expert in workforce development. I think that means I lay awake at night thinking about it and the considerable challenges that we have here. It is a great honor to work through the American Association of Community Colleges on behalf of our community colleges, but know that they are a diverse group, and part of what kept resonating with me during the trip was, so we have community colleges here that have 500 people, and we have community colleges that have 180,000 people. They're medium-sized cities. If you go to Miami-Dade, that's how you feel when you're on campus there. They are totally diverse. They're flexible. They provide access to all. But our challenge, as Josh said, is completion. So part of my aha in Northern Africa was a lot of the challenges are the same that we're grappling with here. And as Josh says, we may be an hour ahead or not. Specifically, I think we grapple with whether we would do better if we were more organized as a system. And we're not here. Like a lot of things in this country, we let a lot of flowers bloom, and they've been blooming for a long time. And part of that is the beauty of our community college system in that they are responsive to their individual community needs. We found a little bit different orientation when we were visiting our countries over there, and their efforts particularly to think that they could organize things more centrally and then have more impact. And I don't know if that's possible or not. So I see that as a challenge. I also think it's a challenge when we're going to get into partnerships on how you then serve the local economic needs and the needs of individual employers. So I think that's a perspective that we brought, is that you might not be able to wrap this up and package it as completely or as neatly as you thought you might. And it's kind of the messiness of our system is part of its beauty and its ability to respond. So I think that's one thing that hit me. And then the other, because we could go on, and we did over there for a long time, but the other thing that struck me is we are doing a lot of work in this country now to talk about the kinds of skills that people need, and really to blur the distinction between what has traditionally been the academic side of the house in the college and the work learning or work preparation side of the house. And we finally admit that really anybody who, like me, put children through college, you will like them to get a job or an occupation or even a career when they graduate. And I'm an English major, so I was a bad child. But that idea now, we really did have a stigma that I still saw in Northern Africa about the workforce preparation side of things. We don't often get credit for that kind of preparation. It's not fully integrated, and because of that, we miss a big point, which is the academic skills that we need in terms of communicating and working with others, and some of those softer skills get lost in between the two. So I think one of the challenges that I saw over there is still that dividing line, and it is something that I think we can help bridge, because it, as Josh says, it's something we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, somebody once said to me, well, college isn't just about getting a job. And I asked them, which college graduate do you know who doesn't want a job? And people also say, we have academic programs and we have workforce programs. And the other quote that I heard recently is 99.9% of students in college are majoring in getting a job, right? I mean, really, they're in workforce programs. Even if they're English majors, they're thinking about what they want to be doing next. And it's not the sole function of higher education, but certainly an important one. Russ, let me turn to you and ask you, where did you see differences, having been, on Bellevue's campus for a number of years now, but also in the American workforce? Where did you see differences between the higher education systems here and their relationship to employers and what you were seeing in the North African countries?
Well, first let me share my gratitude that Kathy expressed to the Aspen Institute and the State Department for giving me this opportunity to go see a place I'd never been before. I do want to throw out a bit of caution. If you travel with Mason, you need to be prepared for the itinerary that she sets out. I believe when we pulled up in front of the hotel in Casablanca, she gave us 9 minutes to go to our room and get our ties on and be back downstairs. And to embellish it a little bit, I believe I said 9 minutes, and she said, if you keep talking, it's going to be 8. So that was the tone of the trip. No, it was tremendous. And to speak to what Josh was talking about, I'll give you a little familiarity with Bellevue College. We're located just outside of Seattle, Washington. We're the beautiful side of Seattle. Microsoft Corporation is 3 miles from our campus. And so I think that's probably what I would touch on as the differences is we have an incredibly tight relationship with industry. And I think that's common throughout a lot of the community colleges across the state, the country. And I didn't see that knitting with industry in any of the regions that we visited. And it's one of the things that gives us a lot of strength. Bellevue College is trying to rediscover their identity, which I think is one of the similarities I saw in the North African region, is they're going through a transition and trying to figure out who they're going to be when they grow up, just kind of like we are. I mean, community colleges, for all intents and purposes, are relatively new in this nation. And I think the one thing we have in common is open access. That really is what defines a community college. We don't turn anybody away. I'm not really sure why we ask students to apply, because if they're breathing, they get in. And I mean, that's really the truth. We'll help them figure out where they need to be and where they go. And one of the unique things about Bellevue College is about 6 years ago, we started offering bachelor's degrees as well. And so we're really trying to discover our identity. Are we a community college? Are we a university? And we're still working on that. The thing that we know for sure is we will maintain the open access approach to our school. And I think that's the similarity I saw. And honestly, there were a lot more things I saw similar in what we do than the things that were dissimilar. I think the only thing that really stuck out was the relationships with industry. And I see that changing. In Morocco in particular, I've had 2 or 3 subsequent conversations with Microsoft. I met the representative from Microsoft there, and it was really interesting to me how quickly the world became small. We happened to sit next to each other at Rick's Diner in Casablanca and discovered that his daughter was going to my school. And so that connected us. And we've had conversations, 2 or 3 conversations with Samir, who I met there, and then Fernando, his supervisor, about what Microsoft wants to see happen in Africa and specifically Morocco. There's a lot of interest there, and there's a lot of opportunity for education to create a relationship with corporations like Microsoft and create relevant careers. The same challenge that all 3 nations we visited are having is the same thing we're experiencing in the Puget Sound. You can find roughly 20,000 open positions in the technology industry in the Puget Sound, 4,000 or 5,000 in Microsoft alone. And that's our goal, is to figure out how to produce qualified students. And that's not just, we're not just looking for geeks. We're looking for people that can speak the language as well as communicate, the soft skills, metacognitive skills. And they're all very distinct, and it's a big, big gap in that industry. And it's the same, we heard that same question every time we sat down. The soft skills, the ability to relate came up over and over.
Russ, you've been building, I think, a partnership that resulted from this intersection with Microsoft. Say a little bit about what is it, the expertise that that Bellevue and through you that you envision we may be able to provide, thinking about that direction, understanding that this will be a give and take relationship in many ways. What is it that that's come through in your partnership, in your views? Maybe say a few words about what's emerging and where you see the points of intersection.
Well, to really boil it down, we've been talking about it as employability. I remember at my president asked me to sit in for him once at a Rotary meeting, and we were all supposed to say something about what we're doing, and I threw out the comment that send us your children, we'll teach them how to support themselves, which didn't go over real well with my boss, but that's essentially what we're talking about, is employability. And there's a ton of pathways to getting certificates, and there's a lot of certification in Microsoft technologies that's happening in Morocco today, just a whole bunch. That's going very well. But how you take certification to employability is the conversation right now. And I grew up in technology. That's where my heart and soul is at. I worked in the trenches and operate now as a CIO, and that's still what I look for in the people that I hire. Not just the technical skills, but how do you relate to the service that you're providing for a user? And that we're all struggling with that. It's a challenge.
So I think Russ can't say this about himself, but he embodies the transfer of professionals from a field into our community college system. And that link, it's an interesting question as to whether you have people who are trained in education and then you teach them the content, or whether you have people who are trained in the content area, in essence, in the workforce in this case, and then you teach them pedagogical skills as they move across. And I do think one of the strengths of our community college system in this country is the way they're employing really successful people from industry and bringing them into the classroom. And it's one of the things I think that we can offer as an opportunity. Many of them adjuncts who are teaching one course at a time. So it's not a full-time profession for many folks. And even though Russ has moved all the way over to the dark side of higher ed, I'm just joking. So I want to turn to the national perspective on this. This trip was sponsored by the State Department, and I want to ask Kelly a little bit about what is the role of the State Department in thinking about human capital development in other countries and the intersection of higher education in the United States with other countries? Why is this kind of thing being sponsored by a state?
It's a good question, because it does go to that question of why in the world is the United States, is the U.S. taxpayer spending our good money in North Africa or in other parts of the world building up someone else's labor force? The short answer is that foreign policy, which of course is the State Department bread and butter, foreign policy is about helping to create a world, diplomacy, helping to create a world that is better for the United States in the end. And what kind of a world would that be? We in the United States think that that world would be more democratic, that it would be more prosperous so that we could be more prosperous, that that world would be more secure so that we in the United States could be more secure, and so that that world would be more just. I'm a product of a Jesuit education myself, so I call it social justice. But we have a version of this, social justice, plain old justice in many, many parts of the world. And I think these are broad goals that we have as in foreign policy for the United States. But I think, Ambassador Bouhlal, I think many of these goals are shared across the governments of the world. We want more democracy, more justice, more security, and more prosperity. I would put then the effort specifically regarding community colleges in two baskets. I'm sorry, let me add a fifth overarching goal, and that's this general idea that if we understand the world better, and the world understands the United States better, that we're all better off, that there's plenty of conversations that can happen. It doesn't have to happen from government to government, but it can happen people to people, college administrator to college administrator, expert to expert, that the more of these kinds of conversations and exchanges and interactions take place, the better off we're going to be as individuals, certainly. You talked about, Kathy, eye-opening experience and life-changing experiences. That's what we're about, certainly, that we want to share those life-changing experiences with as many other Americans as we can, and certainly citizens of the world. So I use a frame of 5 broad areas for foreign policy. I situate the efforts with community colleges in 2 of those 5. One is prosperity for the United States, which must mean prosperity for other parts of the world. They're integrally linked, we can't separate them. And that 5th element of, we call it mutual understanding in shorthand, but essentially connecting our world so that we're building people-to-people ties, so that we're lessening misunderstanding, miscommunication, we're lessening conflict between our country and others, and increasing all the positives that come from exchanges. The State Department has been involved in a very modest way, I don't want to overstate it at all, in the idea of bringing what we think is a very special part of our educational sector to societies around the world, and that's the community college part of the U.S. educational sector. We believe that in fact, there's a tremendous figure, I'm gonna mess it up now, of all the services that we, the United States, export or that we share internationally, our educational models, not just one, not just the community college model, but all sorts, is, I think, the 5th largest in the world. It's billions of dollars, where we're sharing knowledge about our higher education system and attracting students and scholars and innovators to the United States and that flow. So it's a very important sector of our economy, goes to that prosperity piece. And it's something that we think will make other countries more prosperous and that where we can find mutual solutions to the world's problems. So at least since 1996, in my own experience, at least since 1996, we've been talking about the community college model overseas. In 1996, I went to Kyrgyzstan, very much post-Soviet Kyrgyzstan at the time. It hadn't been that many years since the Soviet Union fell, end of 1991. And as probably many of you know, the Soviet model of education was very much that 19th century model of, I am the professor, and you will sit there and write notes about everything I say, and you will memorize it and regurgitate it, send it back to me. Very much the old-fashioned academic model. And the idea in that post-Soviet environment that the government would partner with the community, which would also partner with private sector, of which there was very little in 1996, of course, and together would identify, together with academic sector, government, private sector, and civil society, and together would identify the skills that were needed in a new Kyrgyzstan. Well, it was too far a bridge to build at that point in time. But the idea since then, and not just in Kyrgyzstan, but around the world, is that we would plant these ideas of, we have this rather amazing community college model, which we think would potentially work in many parts of the world. In North Africa in particular, if I may give a couple examples, we have the Community College Initiative Program. It's been going on for 8 years now, and it brings young professionals for 1 year of study at American community colleges. From, let's see, it's study, but also because it's so much, I believe, a part of the community college model, it's studying, but also understanding your community. So there's a component of internships, there is a component for English language, learning and refining your skills, and there's a component of service to the community. So this is, again, drawing on that rather unique idea that a community college serves your local government and your local industry and economy and your community in an academic way, from an academic platform, is something that we have tried to share for quite a few years in the State Department.
Wonderful. I'm very much struck by this community colleges sitting at the fulcrum of a number of different things. I think that what Russ mentioned in terms of open access is really critically important, because the idea there is not that we are about going out and finding students from somewhere else. We're about serving the students we have. The second is this idea of local community, which I think we were very much struck by, is that there's this tension between a centralized idea of what's needed at a government level for an entire country, and differences, regional differences, agricultural areas versus areas that may be more knowledge economy driven or financial centers within these countries, I think really had very different needs. And community colleges both are serving all of the people in the local community. Most students in the United States go to college within 150 miles of where they're born, where they live, where they went to high school. The idea of serving your local community, and then finally this connection to what the labor markets need that results, I think, from all of that, from this notion of, well, we're going to serve who's around us, both in terms of the people, anybody who wants to come, and in terms of the economy. And I think that that model here, while I'm not saying that there aren't four-year colleges that do some of that, they are also largely, many of them are driven towards research and some other functions that may keep them from serving those functions quite as well. So I was very much struck as you were speaking about the State Department's goals, how neatly community colleges fit within fulfilling all of those together. I actually want to turn over to Eamon, who comes to us from one of the four-year colleges, but I know has thought some about generally higher education and vocational training systems in North Africa. And I really want to hear from you a little bit. You've heard from folks domestically who have been thinking about what we're facing and what their observations were. Heard a little bit about the State Department's ideas about what we want to accomplish. I want to hear from you a little bit reflections as somebody who has lived in North Africa across the region for 16 years. Where do you see the opportunities and the challenges in making this kind of connection work?
Thank you, Josh. I was very struck by Kelly's remarks from Kyrgyzstan and how the educational model there was very much the professor top-down 19th century model, perhaps, because it sounded exactly like my education in the 1970s in Britain. But it's funny, I've never really thought of Britain having a Soviet-style economy or education system. But anyway, that
well, we got our education system from Britain and Germany, so it's not, it shouldn't be a surprise if you see similarities.
I'm not taking the blame for all of this today. Yes, observations from the region. I am an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS, just around the corner, but I'm here today really as the managing director of a company called the Siwa Group. Siwa, as many of you know, is a rather beautiful oasis in the Egyptian desert. I've been living and working in North Africa for most of the past 2 decades, and so what I'm going to share now are just some more general observations about the cultural makeup of North Africa as I see it, and how some of the cultural references can be very easily misunderstood, particularly by Americans traveling to the region. I work with the American government now, but most of my clients are private sector. I work with educational companies who want to set up businesses in North Africa. I work with the energy sector, healthcare. And I think one of the biggest problems that all of these sectors, the government and private sector that is, face is perhaps not understanding just how deep-rooted the centralized system is across North Africa. Now, I'm happy to answer questions later and deal with specifics about individual countries, but overall, although the countries of North Africa are moving away from a state central system, it is something which Americans, if I may, find very difficult to come to terms with when trying to deal with the region, just how deeply rooted this system is. That's the first major issue I would raise. I imagine most of you in the room have been to North Africa at some time or another. If and when you have, it's not unlikely you will have struck up conversation with somebody from the region. And one of the very early questions that comes up is, can you help me get a visa to go to the US or to the UK? And it's not such a silly idea, because this is something else very central to many cultures of North Africa, is the sense of wasta, or influence, that you know somebody. And if you know somebody, you can get on. Now that's true in education, it's true in business, it's true in society. When Mohamed Bouazizi self-immolated in Tunisia in December 2010, it was for economic reasons, but it was for lack of wasta. And so when people approach you as Americans, as Europeans in North Africa, asking for assistance to get a visa, it's because there is still a sense that as a foreigner, as somebody from the West, presumably you can speak to somebody and they will be able to help me. Now, that's something which is endemic across the region. It's something which, again, Americans need to understand, that it's not necessarily the right way to proceed. It's not just a question of what's happening in North Africa or the greater Middle East. It happens in many other parts of the world too. But it's a very important one to understand. My wife worked for 3 years in Rwanda, for example, and there it was a similar system. One way around this, of course, is to emphasize greater transparency from the very start. That if you are in hiring or in the recruiting to community colleges and the rest, that it's a very transparent process and accountable. I think overall, with education in North Africa, as the people on this panel know, there is a lack of data available. And I think without the collection of better data over long-term periods, we are on a hiding to nothing when we head into the region and start trying to work, because we will find ourselves coming up against obstacles such as inaccurate data. Right now, for Libya, for example, which country is obviously is in the throes of still trying to put itself back together, we are relying on government figures that suggest 99% literacy. You know, this is something which you can't really work with on any reasonable level. And this is particularly important, I would argue, for the private sector, which is most important for working in these partnerships in North Africa. But the private sector will demand, quite rightly, better, more accurate data before they will move forward. It's not, I hope, all doom and gloom. I don't want to portray this as entirely negative, because it's not. The reason I've lived and worked in North Africa for so long is because I like the region and I have had very good experiences there and many friends. I think what I would highlight most of all is the dynamism in the region and the fact that people have always had the ability to work out their problems in the region, often at the sub-state level. Sometimes this has been because of distrust of the state, But this is something which, again, we need to capitalize on when we go into the region to work, is that there is an ability in the region. People are looking for opportunities. And I know that speaking to clients of mine at the moment in North Africa, the biggest problem they face is there aren't enough qualified people to do the jobs, as Russ was saying about North America. The result of this is that people are being poached every few months from this oil company to go and work for that oil company. So the prices are skyrocketing of salaries, but the training isn't in place to fill the spaces that they need.
Thank you. I'd like to invite others to participate in the conversation as you'd like. I'd like to actually call on Ambassador Buchal, if I could. You've heard from folks from the State Department, from the community college sector, folks who have worked with businesses. Where do you see the opportunity here, and what might you imagine partnerships might look like moving forward?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some remarks with you. Let me first thank the Aspen Institute for the engagement in Morocco, and I would like to thank you not only for what you are doing, but for the way you are doing it, because you come to our region, to our countries with an open heart. You come to our countries with the will to help, and you come to our countries to listen to us. So when you listen to us, then you understand exactly what we want, what we need, and how things can be done. And I think this very different approach is very important. And you mentioned that in your remarks. So I wanted to stress on that because it is so important to be able to listen to us and to understand our problems and the way we are able to overcome the challenges and the role you can play in helping us overcoming these strategies, these difficulties. We have been launching a nice experience in Morocco, which is called the National Initiative for Human Development. We don't have resources in Morocco. We don't have oil. We don't have gas. And we think that our human resources are really think we have to invest on. And this has been launched in 2005. And a very important fund have been created in order to help people all over Morocco. It's how to meet the social needs, how to meet all kinds of necessary needs for our population. And one of them is training. And it is essential to prepare the young graduates who finish their studies and then try to find a job, and they have not been prepared for that. In the United States, you have a very efficient program because in your universities, the companies, the business sector is so connected to the university. They are there, they are present there. They give a lot of loans. They participate on programs. So we have tried to do some of that. We did that on the textile sector, which is an important sector. We did that on aeronautics, and we did that on cinema. We have created for these three sectors institutes to prepare and train people. And the way we have been working on these institutes is to involve the private business. What do you need? How can we prepare people for you? And these institutes has been funded by public funds and by private funds. But those who manage these institutes are the private sector. So they receive these people and they train them. We also did that. We talk to investors, and then we try to meet their needs for their trainings. When we started this big company in the north of Morocco in the automotive sector, which is Renault Nissan, while they were building up the factory, we were training their people. So when they were ready to start the production, everyone was ready to be hired and to work. I think this is also very important, and this is where you can help how to profile and how to build up these institutes to train people. We have been talking in Morocco on our strategic dialogue. And I remember when I was talking with the State Department, and I said, oh, we need to have a working group on culture, education, and interfaith dialogue. They understood interfaith dialogue. But when we talked about culture and education, they thought, what do we need a working group on that? Today, it's one of the most active working groups. And Assistant Secretary Ryan was in Morocco, and you saw how much we can do. We are connecting our universities. Your universities are present in Morocco now, and the University of New England has just opened a campus in Tangier, where 100 students from New England are there. There is a new university in Rabat called the International University of Rabat, who is really connected to all the universities. And I think this is one of the ways to meet the needs of our region, of our citizens, and to prepare them the best possible way.
Thank you. I think this idea of corporations jointly developing skills with universities, with community colleges, is a key part of the solution. And hearing the positive examples in Morocco, I think reinforce our sense of what it is that we need to be doing more of. But also points of intersection. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, if you would just let us know who you are and pose your question or comment.
Yeah, Jean Abinader. While I've been working for Morocco for the last 10 years, most recently as executive director of the Moroccan American Trade and Investment Center, I'm a trainer by profession. So I got into the Middle East. I'm Lebanese by birth, Lebanese American. So I have this already proclivity toward the region. My first training program, courtesy of the U.S. government, my first training assignment in the Middle East was in Yemen in 1974. So I think I know a little bit about training in the region. Most recently had an assignment in Saudi Arabia to help them redevelop their technical vocational training systems. So I go back. I think what stands out here in your presentations today, and I thank you all for the great information that you provided, is one of the lacks that I see is, and the ambassador put his finger on it, is that when it comes to international investors and companies and their needs, Morocco is very responsive because it has the facility to do it, but it doesn't have unlimited resources. And so you'll see the Microsofts and the HPs and the Renaults and the rest of them getting the attention, but it's 15% of the economy. One of the things that the government's having a challenge is getting Moroccan companies to invest in human resources to the same level that the international companies will. And I think that there's no greater curse, knowing the Middle East and North Africa as I do, than having a combination of the French system and the Muslim system on top of an educational system. Because it's all memorization. It's all, and Morocco recognizes this. And INDH, one of the issues that INDH was in terms of school expansion was, okay, how do we teach critical thinking? How do we do some of the soft skills? But it's an issue of scalability. You can do 200 students in Rabat, but can you do 20,000 students in the rural areas? So this is where Mike Ussery, Ambassador Ussery, I don't know if he's still here, worked on a detailed study of establishing a university in the Sahara. And one of the first things that he came to a recognition in interviewing all the people down there was, we don't need a university, we need a community college. Because the emphasis was on employability, the emphasis was on skills. And I think that while we have tremendous good intentions, we shouldn't underestimate whether it's Libya, which has oil, and Algeria, which has gas and oil, Tunisia, which is variable. The real challenge that just not only resources take, but also skills take. I mean, you can't expand schools without qualified teachers. And so while you can train automotive mechanics, because the content is there, the critical learning skills have to be taught by someone who has critical learning. And that, to me, is the gap. It's not just the employability, it's who are the carriers of this new message. And I think if we can come up with solutions to really try to help the Maghreb countries in terms of just better teachings and better curriculums and better methodologies, that will help a lot, because then they can be self-sustaining. Then it's scalable.
Great. Responses from the panel, and we'll turn back. Kelly, you had a thought?
Actually, I have small list prepared. I'm happy to share it later on with anyone who might be interested in a few of the community college specific programs that we do. But I also have another little list that I prepared to share specifically about skills for workforce development, because this is also something that we recognize if we're going to be more prosperous, then the rest of the world has to be more prosperous, and if we're going to be better off, then the rest of the world has to be better off. Let me quickly zip through them. Anything that's of particular interest, I'm happy to expand upon. We believe that English language learning and teaching is a gateway to all sorts of other good things, a gateway to workforce development, to finding jobs, to participating in the global conversation. And so we have several English language teaching and learning programs that we run for the State Department, to include English language fellows and specialists that help with curriculum development. And this is only, of course, when governments, when local, when educational institutions come and ask for that particular expertise, then we can provide it. It is not, on all these programs, it is never something that we bring to Algeria, Morocco, Libya, and say, we have all the answers, this is how you do it. Never, ever. It's all about, this is a lesson learned here, it's a best practice in the US, it's a gap that we have jointly identified, and so we can help fill when governments make the request of us. So we help with curriculum development. We help with, for authorities, governmental authorities and institutional educational authorities. We help with teacher training. We can't possibly teach English directly to all the the global citizens who need English, so we try to help develop the skills of English teachers to then pass on to their students. We have small, even micro scholarship program called Access, which connects underserved youth in high schools in various countries to local English teaching resources. And we give a little scholarship money so that they can take after-school English and weekend English for 2 years, so that when they graduate from high school, they're part of that pipeline that feeds into higher education and into the job market. There are some English language programs. Let me mention quickly on soft skills. We're running MOOC camps on massive open online courses. These are with the leading providers of American providers of open, free university level courses. And what we're doing is we're taking those courses, some of them in entrepreneurship, some of them in English language skills, some of them in the STEM fields, and some of them in leadership, those soft skills of leadership training. And we're providing in-country facilitators together with the online course. All sorts of interesting data out there. Speaking of data, that a MOOC on its own, a great majority of students who might sign up for an open, free online course will never finish. And the way of increasing the numbers of students who actually do finish the course is by having an in-person facilitator in front of the student. We run some, we call it Tech Women and Tech Girls, some programs to help connect those women and girls, and these are in North Africa in particular, to help connect women and girls in the tech fields who want to understand how women might have opportunities in the tech field with American mentors here in the United States. So Tech Women is about giving opportunity for North African women to actually spend several weeks job shadowing, but also participating with women leaders in the tech world. The Tech Girls camps are in country, and we are very. And speaking of cultural norms, for all of these programs that we set up, we're acutely aware in each region of the cultural needs of each country. So, for example, for these Tech Women and Tech Girls, whenever we offer a program to come to the United States or to gather at a summer camp We always engage with the parents so that they know that we'll have chaperones at all times, that the girls will be monitored at all times. So we have to be respectful and aware of the cultural sensitivities anywhere we function. We've also had a bit of a focus in the last couple of years on STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so we're trying to encourage girls and women in particular, and underserved populations, talking about rural populations, to get involved in the STEM field so that they have a better chance, certainly than us English majors perhaps, a better chance of gaining workforce skills and then getting jobs later on.
Thank you. In addition to that comprehensive approach, you talked about getting into the classroom. We run something called the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, and we award $1 million every other year to the best community colleges in the country. It's a $1 million pot. And one of the things that we've seen to get into the classroom, so there are really two approaches. One is real concrete rubrics. The notion that we're going to teach soft skills outside of the classroom, that we're going to layer on a whole new institution or a whole new set of operations is unrealistic. We don't have the resources for that. So the question is, how do you get the content experts to understand that they're not just teaching technical skills, they're actually teaching soft skills? So we have programs that have done a great job, I'm glad to share with you and others, that really have done a very good job of helping to blend the what we call student success courses with the content courses. So they're mandatory courses for all students in the ideal, on how to take notes and how to communicate and how to be on time. I mean, we take these things for granted, but a lot of students come out of American high schools or dropped out and got a GED without having developed those skills. The second way that we do that is in the technical, well, let me just say that the other way of getting into the classroom is in the technical programs to treat the technical programs like jobs. If you show up in flip-flops, you get sent home, and if you get sent home 3 times, you're out. But setting high standards and making clear to students that we're going to, and giving them the support, making the expectations clear, not surprising them so you exclude lots of people, but actually holding standards high. The one other thing I'd like to say, and maybe Russ for a moment, if you could speak on this, I want to get to some other questions, is we can't expect colleges to do the work alone. There are community-based organizations in the United States, Goodwill International, there's a place called Year Up that maybe, Russ, you can say a moment about, that are very good at teaching soft skills to students. And we're starting to think about blending community-based organizations with community colleges. Not saying you go over here for a day and then you come here for a day, blending the structures to new types of institutions. Goodwill is building a college in Texas, a college. It's basically saying the soft skills is where things reside. We're going to build a new college and bring the professors in, rather than trying to bring the soft skills into the college. But these are new structures where we're trying to jointly develop these critical soft skills that industry needs with the technical skills, that they're delivered in the same place. Russ, maybe if you want to say a word about the Year Up model, because Bellevue is one of the places where that new structure is being developed.
Year Up is a nonprofit started in Boston and has a chapter in Seattle. It's essentially a 1-year program that students are paid to go through. 6 months is training, soft skills, along with technical skills, and then the next 6 months is in an internship in a profession somewhere. They're help desk, quality assurance, bank teller are some of the ones that they're working with, and it's sponsored by corporate entities that then employ the interns, or the internships happen at their establishment. We are we're experimenting with a pilot at Bellevue, and one of our sister colleges, the other side of the state. Over the next year, we're going to see, we're attempting to see how this blends into a classroom. One of our big challenges is the sacred 11-week quarter and breaking it up and chunking it up and making this work. The other big challenge, and you spoke to it, is, and we all face this, scaling something. We could, every community college I know can take 40 students and make them successful through role model support, through mentoring, through soft skills, whatever the process is. We can take 40 students, and I guarantee you we can make them successful. But I have 36,000 students at Bellevue. And scaling those things is the real challenge, and it's the same challenge we're facing everywhere.
I'll turn to you, Kathy, if we can add, let's add another question in, please.
I think I have an idea that, who am I? Bill Lawrence. I am a former Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, Fulbright scholar in Tunisia with 12 years. years in the region, so I feel for the region the way you do. And currently teaching at GW and work for several think tanks in town. I have an idea, I think, that falls squarely in the challenges and conundrums and opportunities that we have right here. Starting with the big problem, which I think is high university graduate unemployment. It's 3-4 times the unemployment rate in Tunisia and Morocco for non-university. And traditional private sector and traditional public sector cannot create enough jobs for these hundreds of thousands, millions of university graduates with the wrong skill set, but the jobs won't be there. Part of the discussion today assumes an industry with 20,000 tech jobs like in that aren't there. And even if you are creating for the aerospace industry a certain number of jobs, that is a limited approach. So here's my idea. You've got millions of university graduates, a lot of them with a big social conscience in the context of the Arab Spring, who want to work on something to improve the society. You can take any problem and kind of mobilize university graduates towards fixing it. Any problem. I could give you 100 examples. Let me give you one. You have a 50% literacy rate in over 50% in Morocco, over 70% in Tunisia, and whatever it is in Libya, 80, 90%. It's higher in Libya, but even if we don't have the data. Instead of saying, Ministry of Education, let's take the teachers in the community and teach on the weekends. I've seen it. It works in Morocco. Why not say, we'll get together a huge cohort of university graduates and make the whole country literate in 3 to 5 years. You could do it in public health. You could do it in tech areas. You could do it in almost area. And so my other point underscoring all this is, instead of a skills-based approach, although skills are important, or a cognitive approach, I love critical thinking. It's all part of it. How about a problem-solving approach, where you actually make your community colleges and your universities problem-solving centers that incubate
Thanks.
and mobilize these communities of people with the wrong skills, but they're highly trained around solving problems. That's my
Great. So Kathy, if you'd like to respond to the prior comment, but if anybody has thoughts about this idea of problem-solving approaches, and if people have comments on that particularly, we'll go around as well.
Just a word for a great idea that would probably work here as well, frankly. There was a lot of interest that we saw in entrepreneurship and small business development. And I think there was a lot of appetite for being able to initiate solutions writ large. So that might be another way to think about. And we have followed up with a number of groups that we think can provide some support on that in terms of entrepreneurship, leadership, those kinds of things. But it might be good to bring you into that loop with this idea. Try it, you know. I did want to do a little bit of a shout out that ties back to the beginning of your comments and those of the ambassador. I really want to applaud some of the work that is being done in Morocco between NC3 and companies like Snap-on and others that have initiated, largely around the automotive sector, but really very specific training programs. And I promised Roger Tchesky, who just got back from Morocco last week, that I would at least hold up his pictures. They did, and this is U.S. corporate-sponsored training in torque and electrical measurement that was in place last week. I don't know if you were a part of it, but we do have companies that are very interested and supportive and working directly with the country, and I think to their credit, they are looking at the whole student because we work with these companies here, and they are integrating the soft skill, the very specific skills, and then the long-term career opportunities for these people. So I think there's great promise in that. Great credit to the Moroccan government and others for letting them in and welcoming them and seeing what could be done. The last picture, they're establishing a new facility that's going to be open in the fall. That will be a training facility. So we've got some partnerships there to build on that are exemplary for the world, really, and we should build on those.
Yeah, I think that this notion of the blending of the technical needs with the soft skills gives you a context in which to do it. But I want to go see, I know there were hands up about this gentleman's question here. Yes.
Hamid Lilou, I'm MENA region linguist and cultural analyst at USMC, pro solely support USMC Operational Cultural Learning. I have a question. Actually, I was surprised since we're talking about closing the skills gap. None of the panelists mentioned anything about brain drain and all the skilled and trained North African coming to the West and not going back home. How would you tackle this issue, and have you thought about sort of twinning teams using those trained diaspora, not necessarily going back home, but at least participate in implementing all those projects, knowing that actually they understand the cultural differences that the ambassador mentioned?
Thank you. Great question. Tony?
I think it's a great question. One of the things we're doing in the Partners for New Beginning is really doubling down on the diaspora piece, not just in the context of finance and support for entrepreneurship, but I think you're absolutely correct on the issue of relationship with brain drain and how you can marry those skills in country and those who are outside the country. So you're spot on. I'd be interested to know more. I think Josh may have some further comments.
Yeah, so we see this in a lot of rural America where, and we see it in the Midwest when the steel industry's dried up. You know, we talk about how they're waiting. We hear about the waiting lines for classes in California, but in Michigan and Wisconsin and some of the steel belt in western Pennsylvania, they actually have extra capacity in their higher education system because people are leaving and they're not coming back. And you know, where you see this resolved, there's a notion of a new vision for the local economy. I mean, you know, I know that's a long-term answer, but people have to have something to return to. And so Walla Walla Community College in Western Washington, 1999, you know, it's an agricultural area. When the United States signed NAFTA, a lot of the agricultural production went to Mexico and to other places where the labor costs were lower. They had huge unemployment rates, but they had a vision for a new economy. And it was built around wine making. It was built around wind energy, built around water management, environmental stewardship, and higher tech agricultural production. And they have one of the lowest unemployment rates of any rural community just in 14 years. In 1999, the biggest thing that happened was tumbleweed and a cattle drive through the middle of town. Today there are 200 wineries and tasting rooms and fine restaurants and one of the best John Deere tractor mechanic program in the country, where they're sending people all over a quarter of the country. I mean, and it was the higher education system working with the industry folks, the employers, the business people in the region, and with government, with the regional the Workforce Investment Board, their equivalent of that. And they got together and created a vision, and they pursued it collectively. And people don't leave there. In fact, they're attracting people from Seattle now, pardon Russ. They're attracting people out of the urban area. People are clamoring to come there. When they have open positions at the institution, at the community college, they have a waiting list of people who want to do that, including in math, where we have struggles finding people. So I think the answer is a vision and creating clusters naturally that build around the assets of a community can actually reverse that and create, it's one thing for people to give back to their community, and we should appeal to that. But the other is to provide real opportunity, and finding the concrete areas for that to happen, I think it would be positive. Yes, you've had...
Is it possible to do that, though, in a highly centered... all of the examples that all of you have given today are all examples of where local communities have joined with industry or local education institutions, and it has your conversation has had a very local flavor to it, and implying this great strength that grows up out of that kind of very creative thinking. Can you do that in a highly centralized society?
Great question.
Institutional structure, governmental structure, and economy.
So, Eamon, you raised this question of centralization and working with businesses. Perhaps you have some thoughts about this?
It's a problem. One example I would give, about 8 years ago, I was based in Tunis for a year, where I was studying Arabic for my master's degree. which I took in the UK. I had a wonderful instructor there, a young woman, who was desperate to get out of Tunisia, say, going back 8 years. Since 2011, she's been working, helping with Arabic language training at the US Embassy in Tunis, and she has been getting out the vote, particularly among women in Tunisia. And she's determined not to leave the country because in the case of Tunisia, she's seen great advances. But her big problem is, apart from the fact that her friends think she's crazy for not coming to America to get a job, they want her to be part of the brain drain because they see more opportunities in North America and Western Europe than they do in Tunis. Her big problem is, as she sees it, that the government is still too centralized, and she is not able to make progress that she would in a decentralized system. Listen, this isn't going to happen overnight. It needs to happen. Is it happening? Not so much.
I'd like to get just a few more brief comments on the table or questions and then allow the panel. We're really just about out of time, but there are a lot of hands up, and I hate to see hands up so if you just have a brief comment or question, and then we'll collect all of them and then allow for any responses that may emerge. Please.
All right. Hi, I'm Yasmin Al-Baghari from Morocco. Thank you for a great panel. So first I want to point out that I conducted research on the educational system in Morocco last summer, and besides the bifurcated system that exists in Morocco, the French-Arabic transition, another issue that I found was the implementation of the projects that are being held within the country. On the other hand, the issue of migration was also another issue that I tackled, traveling around about 10 countries in Europe, interviewing about 35 students from all over North Africa. Found some really interesting results as well. And in terms of entrepreneurship and the startup, I mean, I just got on board with this Silicon Valley company in San Francisco, and they're sending me to about 15 countries to turbocharge the ecosystem. I'm going to be basically promoting entrepreneurship around the region starting in August. And what they do basically is they identify young entrepreneurs from all over North Africa and the Middle East, and they bring them to Silicon Valley for a month to 2 months program, and they basically teach them the skills and the tools that they need to incubate their own companies. They go back to the region and improve the economy. So it's called PITME, Progress in Technology Middle East. I'd be happy to tell you more about it later. Quick comment.
Thank you. And you may want to connect with Kathy on the American Association of Community Colleges working with Goldman Sachs on building 10,000 small businesses here. And so I think that might be a great connection. Yes.
Hi, Pam Beecroft. I'm the Program Officer for North Africa at the Center for International Private Enterprise. We have partners all across the region, and including, actually, interestingly enough, in Tunis or in Tunisia. We now have a new partner in SVEX, and they are a union of small and medium industries, and they decided that they wanted their project to work on the education system because they, as citizens and as business owners, want to hire locally and want to hire young people, and they can't. And they're trying to figure out where in the value chain they can bring some value and where the reforms need to happen, fully realizing that this over-centralization means that even the reforms they know are necessary, they may need to spend a long time advocating for at many different levels to get through. Just 3 quick points. You know, at one point someone, I'm forgetting who now, said that, you know, we may sort of overemphasize the non-work side or being disingenuous about the fact that college is for work here in the United States. But I would say in the region, and you know, I've lived in the region since I was a child, and I've spent a fair amount of time now in North Africa over the last few years, and over the years, period. In the region, they may overemphasize the work side, which is to say that only certain careers are considered acceptable culturally still in the region, and that's not saying it's always the case, but how many taxi drivers do you meet who are engineers? How many young people do you talk to who said, well, I wanted to be a French major, but my dad said no? You know, the fact that that's I've a lot of times, and in many countries. Second thing is, I think the model of the student-teacher relationship is changing, but it still persists. That sort of I speak, you listen. I had a Lebanese professor who once told us that we should, the only 2 things we could do in the classroom was listen and breathe.
Well, good thing he didn't give you just one option.
Yeah, I was like, can we do both? I think the other thing, centralization isn't just a system, it's also an ideal in certain corners. And the last thing, I mean, there are many other factors, but is the sort of mentality of état-providence, entitlement, whatever you want to call it, but this idea that we ask and you give. You have there a crazily linked, crazily complex confluence of mentality and system issues. And they sometimes maybe can benefit from one approach, and sometimes they require two different kinds of interactions and different entry points. There are lots of energetic, inspiring people in the region who want to see that change and want to change aspects of that. My question is, where can the community college model fit into that sort of catalyst role and help people who want to change the region to help their young people and everyone else fulfill the lives that they want to live?
Well, thank you for the context and the question. I'm not sure we will get to an answer to it, but I do want to allow one last comment here, and we're going to have to then close. And thank you.
Yeah, I just want to agree with you. I've been in the region for a long time. I'm also a Lebanese American. I was at Johns Hopkins, but an American university running the campus in Sharjah. And we have a university in Morocco now, and we're in Saudi Arabia running 11 community colleges for the government of Saudi Arabia. And I tell you, the biggest issue that we face is the students picking their majors, picking what they want to study. 80-some% want to go into business, yet one of the largest fields in the Arab world now is hospitality. Try to convince kids to go into hospitality, students. They don't want to go into hospitality. So you go to Jordan and you go to the Dead Sea and you'll find Turks working there. You won't find Jordanians, even though there's a huge amount of tourism happening in Jordan. I work now for Laureate Education, which is, we have 800,000 full-time students across the globe. So, we get the perspective from sort of 30,000 feet. So my advice in terms of the Arab world and in Morocco and other countries is to educate the kids coming in early on about the opportunities, because we can speak to industry all we want. We know what industry wants. We do know what industry wants. The question is getting these students in to do those kind of jobs, because culture stands in the way. They want to do business and they want to do engineering, maybe medicine. Practically nothing else, and that's the biggest problems that we are facing.
Thank you. I know there was one. Yes.
Hi, Ariane Gosha from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. A question which will perhaps remain unanswered is, based on the U.S. experience, how are you partnering with the local education system, primary and high school level, to ensure that some of these cultural issues are addressed, but also some of the basic quality issues that we're facing in our own system and our parallel problems in the partner countries, basic numeracy, literacy skills, et cetera.
Thank you. And you've had your hand up for some time. Just a last comment for the gentleman.
My name is George Gavaki. I'm very active in the Middle East, particularly the Gulf region, with education. I represent U.S. educational technology companies in the region, expanding into international schools, universities, community colleges, and ministries. Some would be companies you would know, others, and if you may know in the education sector, there are a lot of small companies that do a lot of interesting things. My comment would be, and the Gulf region is very different in many ways from the experience that I'm having working there, is one of the things is there's a group called the Community Colleges of International Development, about 170 community colleges. I didn't hear anything mentioned about them. I was under the impression they do a lot of work in the workforce area and do a lot overseas and get State Department funding. So I was trying to understand kind of their role, because obviously they are focused on international. And then if you've had any observations on Houston Community College starting their community college system in Doha a few years ago. They have a large contract there. And I was just wondering if there were best practices or experiences, because I'm very familiar with some of those activities.
Thank you. Let me allow, on any of the questions that were asked, if anybody has a quick comment that they'd like to make, and then turn it over to Tony for some final remarks. Yeah.
I wanted to address the questions you had and basically say I don't have an answer, but what I did experience was the beginning of a dialogue. I would say two things. I was really struck by the challenge in describing what tuition was to the people that we met in the region. And I would also suggest that we need to have a dialogue over the next few years about what not to remove in a centralized system, because to say it's all bad is a mistake. The difference here is we have an entitled system in the United States. 60% go to college. That means 40% don't. And that situation doesn't exist in North Africa to that extent. So I would suggest we need to sit down together. Just to have this dialogue. We're not, the question of scale, the question of what's the instructor of the 21st century look like, because it is very different, but I can't say that anybody has it figured out. MOOCs were mentioned earlier, and that's really not that different. I mean, it's a recorded, listen to me, and I'm not going to listen to you back. So we have a big problem. The biggest thing that struck me was the number of similarities in problems and challenges that we're facing across the world, and the rich opportunity we have to work together in solving them.
Thank you.
Real quickly, we do work with CCID and with Houston. Those are terrific examples of how other community college systems can get involved. I would love to follow up with you on that.
So
Note. Speaking of resources, can I put in a plug for my bureau? My part of the State Department is going to be letting out a request for grant proposals in early June for community colleges or a consortium of community colleges to run our community college administrator program for any institution that might be interested. You'll find it on grants.gov.
Thank you. So in a lot of the questions, I have two just final ideas, and then I do want to allow Tony a moment. One is data. I mean, it was talked about earlier how data can really drive things. So if you want to reach students early, show them the jobs, show them that there are salaries associated. Monroe Community College in upstate New York has done a fabulous job. They have manufacturing jobs that are open, and nobody wants them. They're going down into the high schools and showing kids that there are jobs waiting for them if they go ahead and get their degree. So you've got to have good information that people can rely on, and they have to see that people make the leap. The second is that data can really be used to draw people around this notion of collective impact, of a common goal. And I think this responds to lots of the comments that were made. The K-12 comment, the comment about how do you get people in a centralized government driving in a particular direction. You know, where we see it happen here at the state level, or you know, some of these colleges are 4 campuses and 70,000 students, right? We're not talking about simple, isolated places. And where you see them moving substantial numbers of students, dramatic improvements in student success, they're putting data out and saying, is it okay? Is it okay that 80% of our students don't graduate? Is it okay that there's a 30% gap between minority students and majority students? Is that okay? People actually all care about the same things. And if you hold out data and you get a set of goals, and those goals can be shared by K-12 systems and higher education, or by industry and higher education, and then you allow people to innovate. That may be a problem in an innovative, rather in a centralized system. I think you can actually start to drive common movement, cultural movement. But the first is to come to an agreement. The notion of collective impact, which Melody Barnes' program here is working really carefully on, community solutions, trying to find the target. What is it that we want to accomplish? We want 10,000 people to be employed who have college degrees in these industries. Those are the kinds of things that can drive all the way through systems. And if they're monitored with good data, it can really make a big difference. I think that responded to a number of the comments made. Tony, let me hand it back to you.
Josh, very, very well done. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And in the true Aspen fashion, this conversation seeded a lot of rich and interesting ideas. But I want to conclude by not only thanking everyone, but also reminding everyone, as Ambassador Buchal said so well, we have engaged in this partnership not only in the context of the Partners for New Beginning, but a partnership with our colleague Josh Weiner and those who are at the table, our panelists, with an open heart, a willingness to engage and deepen a partnership to scale and leverage on the ground, and also, more importantly, to listen. And as we begin and as we follow up from today's conversation, I hope that everyone will be in touch with us, and because we are very interested in these ideas. But as everyone who has ever worked with me knows, I'm very much about looking at timelines for delivering and thinking through when do we do our next delegation, how do we build out, because as Josh said, in order to do this, we have to help together shape a narrative and a common agenda in a region that is changing externally, but also tackling internal issues. I'm struck by His Majesty's speech he gave, I think now probably 8 months ago, on the higher education system, on the whole educational system in Morocco. And he basically says, this is my call to action to you. We will do better. We are going to engage in the new ideas. So I thank everyone. As I attended a speech this week, and Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, so eloquently said that if we dare the difference will deliver. I hope that all in this room will work with us in daring that difference in order for us to deliver. Thank you so much.